This has become a practice for us every week. I don't love doing it, by the way, but I just think it's important because the AP poll and the coaches poll are okay. People do their best. I don't know how much time the coaches are putting into it. And the AP, there's just different philosophies. Like some people look at bad losses. Some people look at great wins. Some people look at the eye test. Some people look at the resume. I like kind of use a combination of all those to put my list together. But just so you know, I don't really quantify bad losses that much because I constantly hear that bad loss, bad loss. But Notre Dame has a bad loss. Alabama has a bad loss. Tennessee has a bad loss. Like to me, all losses are bad. You know what I mean? Like I don't view one loss as being better than the other loss. Like Georgia losing to Bama, people would say that's not a bad loss. It's a good loss. There's no good losses. All losses are bad. So let's get out of like the moral victory world. Okay. All losses are bad. Good losses versus bad losses are all bad. And good wins, I think, however, can certainly still vault you up regardless of what happens throughout the rest of the season. So let's go through it. Texas is number one. They have a good win and a convincing win over the Michigan Wolverines. Now, will that win hold up for Texas? You know, Texas has plenty of meat on the bone. They still have Oklahoma. They still have Georgia. So they still have A&M, which is looking like it's going to be more and more of a challenge to beat moving forward, especially at their place at the end of the year. So Texas still has plenty of meat on the bone, and the win against Michigan might not hold up. Michigan might fall flat and finish 8-4, 7-5. But as of this moment, I still think going on the road to Ann Arbor and dominating the way they dominated is a really good performance. Let's go to number 2, Ohio State. A little bit on eye test here. Just a little bit. And you know, I don't love to use eye test all the time. I just don't love it. Feels like kind of have to, though. I mean, we are now 6 weeks into the season, and it's not Ohio State's fault that Michigan State and Iowa are not super elite. It's not. I think Iowa's pretty good. I think Iowa's improved from where they were a year ago. I don't know if their defense is quite as good, but I still think Iowa is a rock solid win, which is why I have Ohio State sitting at number 2. Number 3, it's Penn State. A little different from how the AP has it. They have a good win. I think they have a suffocating defense. For those that'll gravitate towards the low-hanging fruit that was the Bowling Green first half, I get it. But Penn State, in pretty much every other game, has looked rock solid on the defensive side. They beat Illinois convincingly. They harassed Luke Altmaier in the process. So I think that's a really good win, and that's what will bolster the resume, at least at this point, for Penn State. They'll have a big opportunity coming up this weekend when they play against USC. Oregon sits at number 4. This is where I go a little bit off the eye test because they really haven't beaten anybody. And that's no disrespect to UCLA. That's no disrespect to Boise. That's no disrespect to Michigan State. I don't know about Oregon just yet. But guess what? I'm going to find out about them this week. Ohio State comes to town. And if they play up to Ohio State, even in defeat, if it's an all-time classic, it's going to feel a lot like the Bama-Georgia game from a week ago, where, yes, Georgia dropped, but they didn't drop much. They dropped a little bit because you still came away respecting Georgia and acknowledging that Georgia's not a team you want to play. That could happen with Oregon this week. So they haven't really played anybody, and they don't have the resume to justify number 4 ranking, but I still think they're pretty good, and they're not a team I want to play right now. But Ohio State will get them this week. We'll learn all we need to know about those 2 teams. Let's go to number 5. Alabama is at number 5. People will say they lost to Vandy. I understand. It's a bad loss. It's a concerning performance. Defensively, they have significant issues. No one's pushing back on that. But they beat Georgia. So I have to give them credit for that. I have to acknowledge that that's a big-time win. And as of this moment, just making sure, looking at the rankings, according to both the coaches and according to the AP, Georgia is the top 1-loss team, which translates to Alabama has the best win of the season. If you beat the top 1-loss team, then you have the best win of the season. I feel like it's pretty simple. Georgia then comes in at number 6. They beat Clemson. Clemson's a team I have a ton of respect for. They didn't just beat them, by the way. They beat them convincingly and played really well in the second half of that football game. So I have Georgia sitting at number 6. At number 7, it's the Miami Hurricanes. They haven't really beaten anybody. Now, when you look at the schedule going to Florida, that's a solid win. It's a solid win. Who knows what's going to happen with Florida as we move forward in the season, but that's still a solid performance. They went to Cal. I think Cal's solid. Miami, though, at this point, still a little bit of an unknown as far as strength of record is concerned. Now, as you guys have watched, I love what they're capable of, but the close calls do have my antenna raised just a little bit. They're undefeated, but a play or two here and there, and this thing could have looked very, very different. So right now I have them at 7 in full control of their own destiny, but there are some question marks that I now have about the team that I've long favored in the ACC. At number 8, I have Tennessee. Now, Tennessee just beat Oklahoma a couple weeks ago. I still think Oklahoma's a solid football team. They're ranked in the top 20 as of this moment. I don't know if that will sustain, kind of like what we just talked about with Texas, who beat Michigan. Will that Michigan game still hold up when we fast forward to the end of the year and Michigan's lost a few more? If they lose a few more, will it hold up? That might be the case for Tennessee's win against Oklahoma, but as of this moment, still a rock-solid performance. At number 9, I have BYU, a little different than most people. I look at the resume, and with the win against both SMU and Kansas State, those two teams currently are very, very, very solid. Kansas State sits in the top 20. SMU has now cracked the top 25. They have beaten 2 ranked opponents, and they did so in pretty remarkable fashion. The win against Kansas State, yes, they were outgained, but they dominated at times the line of scrimmage, forced a lot of mistakes, and they made SMU look really human. There a couple weeks ago, BYU sitting there undefeated. I think they are really underrated right now when you look at the AP poll. Notre Dame sits at number 10. I understand that they have a terrible loss. I get it. The NIU loss is a tough one to wrap your head around, and clearly for a lot of you guys that are commenting on these videos, you acknowledge that NIU loss is brutal. I get it. People saying the list lacks any credibility by having Notre Dame in it. Well, who are you going to have in front of them? That's my question. Who should be in front of Notre Dame based on what they've accomplished this year? Because Notre Dame, while losing to NIU, also beat Texas A&M. And I'm not sure there's anybody that benefited more from Texas A&M's performance this past weekend. Notre Dame went and handled A&M in their own building. A&M is currently ranked in the top 15, meaning Notre Dame has one of the best wins in the country, and they did it on the road in a hostile environment. Notre Dame sits at number 10. At number 11, Clemson. Clemson hasn't beaten anybody. They haven't, but they sure look good, don't they? They sure look like a team you would not want to play right now. At number 12, Ole Miss. Haven't beaten anybody. Their best win so far is against South Carolina. And at this point, I don't know how good South Carolina is, but they went and they won that game rather convincingly. Iowa State is sitting at number 13. Iowa State does have a solid win against Iowa. I got to give them credit for that. I think Iowa is pretty human. Had they beaten Iowa the way Ohio State beat Iowa, I'd feel a little differently about that victory. They didn't. They got by just ever so slightly, and they are undefeated. But at this point, Iowa State has to show me just the tiniest bit more to go join the likes of BYU and Miami and some of the other undefeateds that currently reside in my top 10. At number 14, I have Texas A&M. It wasn't so much that they beat Missouri, and you could say Missouri is a paper tiger. I'm fine with that. I won't push back on it whatsoever. I kind of agree with it, if I'm going to be honest with you. But it was the way they beat Missouri, the way they ran the football, how efficient that offense looked with Connor Wigman at quarterback, his accuracy that was on display. I thought he looked great in his return to the starting lineup, and it clearly caught Missouri off guard. So Texas A&M in at number 14. LSU is at 15. LSU hasn't really beaten anybody. Their best win, not all that unlike Ole Miss, was against South Carolina, and it was far less convincing than Ole Miss's victory against the Gamecocks. And then at number 16, welcome to the Sweet 16, Indiana. Indiana's won every game by at least 14 points. All right. They have scored at least 40 in each of their last 4 games, but their best win at the moment right now is against a Maryland team that might barely get to bowl eligible. So Indiana, one of the best stories in the sport, couldn't be more excited about what I've seen from their quarterback, couldn't be more excited about what I've seen from their team. But at this point, it's difficult for me to 100% justify them being up there in the top 10 alongside some of those teams that have been a little bit more battle tested.